Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third UMDemocracy event. As you may know, the UMDemocracy series aims to provide resources and information on things to know before the election this November. And today we're focusing on election polling. My name is Amy Eichhorst. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Alumni Relations for the university and Executive Director of your Alumni Association. And I'm coming to you live from the Samuel Riggs IV Alumni Center on campus, and boy, does it feel great to be here. Today, we will be discussing identity politics and why diverse representation matters. Our esteemed panel of elected officials, all Terps, or Terp parents, by the way, plan to discuss the importance of civic engagement and leadership, particularly within Black and Brown communities. If you have any questions during the panel, please feel free to share them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, as we will have a time for question and answer towards the end of the program. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Jason Nichols, our moderator for today's event. Dr. Nichols received his PhD in American Studies in 2012 and his BA in African American Studies in 2000. Dr. Nichols is an award-winning full-time senior lecturer in the African American Studies Department at the University of Maryland, College Park, and was the longtime editor-in-chief of Words, Beats, and Life, the global journal of hip-hop culture, the first peer-reviewed journal in hip-hop studies. Dr. Nichols has been recognized by the University of Maryland community for his tireless efforts to help students develop. In 2018, the Office of Multicultural Student Education awarded him the Academic Excellence Award for Outstanding Faculty, and the Student Success Leadership Council awarded him the M. Lucia James Impact Award. In 2015, Dr. Nichols was given the Faculty Advisor of the Year Award by the UMCP NAACP. Dr. Nichols is also a progressive political and social analyst whose work has been featured in publications such as The Guardian, Al Jazeera, FoxNews.com, NBCNews.com, and more. He also makes regular appearances on Fox News Channel, Al Jazeera English, Newsmax, MSNBC, and others. Dr. Nichols currently co-hosts the Fifth Element Talk radio show on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C., and is a weekly columnist for RokaNews.com. And he will be our moderator today. Dr. Nichols, we're so proud to have you as part of our faculty, and take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me be a part of this. I'm so excited to be a part and to talk to our esteemed panelists. Of course, I know Alonzo or Representative Washington and Representative or Delegate Fisher. This is my first time meeting Congressman Brown. And I just want to send best wishes to my former student and very good friend, Jazz Lewis, who is in the process of seeing his first child be born. I know that feeling. I know the anxiety and the nervousness and the excitement. So I'm just as excited for him to have that moment. And if there was one thing that would be more important than being right here, it's that. So, you know, keep Delegate Lewis in your thoughts. In the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump, many people on both sides of the political spectrum blamed the centering of the concerns of marginalized groups for Hillary Clinton's defeat. Words like woke, that once signified knowledge and awareness of how structures function to recreate racial and ethnic and gender hierarchies, quickly became pejoratives. Identity blindness, a concept that grew out of the conservative discourse of the 1980s, began to reemerge in the center-left media. All lives matter would become a retort to any desire to prioritize the victims of state-sanctioned violence. Today, we're going to discuss the topic of identity politics with some of our Democratic elected officials, all of whom are connected to the University of Maryland, and ask them what direction the state and the nation is headed. So with that, I just want to ask each person, and we'll start with Delegate Washington, to sum up, you know, to introduce themselves first, and then sum up what identity politics actually mean to them. Delegate Washington?
First, thank you, Jason, for having this event. Thank you to the University of Maryland alumni for also hosting us. I'm really excited to be here. Proud Terp, 2007. played for the football team. Also I'm also a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the infamous Iota Zeta chapter. So critically happy to be here and see everybody. I am a state delegate, just so you all know. I serve as the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Delegates. I formerly was a deputy majority whip. I know Congressman Brown was the whip in the House when he was in Annapolis some years ago before he became lieutenant governor and then obviously congressman. Look, identity politics means to me is that, sometimes it's very difficult for us to be into silos and be in our silos of what we believe is difficult for us to discern to ensure that we all have certain topics and things that we care about. We all forget that there's other people that have different types of issues that are out there. So for me, I try to think of things in a way that I believe is the best interest of my community. So I want to make sure that everybody believes that although I'm a Democrat, I'll make sure I keep an open mind to everyone's issues. And I try to walk across the aisle multiple times to actually work with my colleagues in the Republican Party to make sure that we have and understand their issues and their concerns, and especially here in Maryland, because we have a rural community. So I wanted to make sure that I don't lean towards this silo, and make sure that I actually work across the aisle and ensure that we come together for the best interests of Maryland. But don't get it twisted. I am a progressive Democrat, and I make sure that we get things done in the best interest of Black and brown people and people in our communities and women in our communities and single mothers in our communities. So I'm a steadfast, hardcore, progressive Democrat here from Prince George's County. So happy to be here and look forward to the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Delegate Washington. Delegate Fisher?
Okay, good that you're having me go before the congressman, because he's difficult to follow. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Nichols and Lauren, for everything. Welcome to everyone out there on the digital universe. I'm a proud Terp. I graduated from the University of Maryland in 2010. I'm getting older. It's been 10 years. My name is Wanika Fisher. I should have started with that. I'm a state delegate, and I also serve with Vice Chairman Washington. I'm in the Maryland House of Delegates. I am in my first term, 2 years in. I'm also a board member of the University of Maryland Alumni Association, which is a great organization. It's part of hosting this, and I think helps facilitate our Terrapin family outside of just our 4 years at the university. And so I'm very thankful to serve our university in that capacity. I am an attorney. I used to be a prosecutor in the county. I'm a defense attorney now. I actually had court this morning before this call, and I serve in the House Judiciary Committee. I tend to be a bit of a workhorse in the House. I've sat on 3 work groups. So I did our gang and criminal work group. I'm on our marijuana work group, and we're just wrapping up our police reform work group for the House. When it comes to the House, I'm the assistant majority leader. So I'm the highest ranking freshman member in the House of Delegates. So thanks to our illustrious first Black woman speaker, Adrienne Jones, she created a leadership position for someone who's a new elected, so considered a freshman, just like at college, and it was elected by the other freshmen. So the 43 other freshmen, I ran against someone, and then you're in House leadership. So it's the first time our General Assembly's ever done something like that, I think, to have new voices into what's happening in our state government. I live in Prince George's County, right near University of Maryland. My district is Adelphi, Langley Park, Lewisdale. Those of you who have probably been to Prince George's Plaza Mall, that's my district. So I'm a stone's throw away. I am a member of the illustrious and crossed, the tenacious Theta Nu chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated at University of Maryland. And I think for me, that's a little bit about myself. I would say one of the things I always want to highlight, and Congressman Brown also has his immigrant background as well. You know, I'm a proud Black immigrant. And I think sometimes in our politics, the word immigrant and race and the intersectionality aren't highlighted. So I'm a first-generation American. My dad is Nigerian Yoruba, born in Lagos. My mom is Indian South African, so Asian. 3 generations in South Africa. My uncle was killed and my family kind of suffered during the apartheid struggle. They fled to Europe and then to the United States. So a lot of things that are happening right now in our country, especially around our immigrant community, is very personal to me. And I think with identity politics, I bring that up because I'm constantly dealing with all my intersectionalities of being a woman, of being a first-generation American, an immigrant kid, being a Black woman, being an Asian woman. You know, finally, I don't have to explain what I am all the time. I just go, I'm the same as Kamala Harris. And constantly in my journey in politics, I always have to explain exactly what I am. And what I am is a Marylander, first and foremost. But identity politics is important because people want to know that you relate to their community and their background. But I think the other part of that is sometimes people end up in boxes. When more of us have more in common than we have apart, and I think especially for women of color, the intersectionality of gender and race is critical of how it affects us. You can see the issues that Congressman Brown has led on this. Delegate Washington has also led on this. Even though they're men, they care a lot about Black female mortality rates and giving birth, right? It doesn't matter what income you are as a Black woman in America, you are more likely to die or have issues when you have a baby, and it doesn't matter of income. So where does that come from? And it's so important to not only recognize that intersectionality, but have allies, you know, like Vice Chairman Washington and Congressman Brown, who care about what's happening to the women in their community. And so I just think that's so important. So I think identity politics is really finding yourself in politics and in government and feeling like people are going to work for you. So that was a long answer, but that was it. And I'll give it off to Congressman Brown.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Delegate Fisher. And we certainly need workhorses in government. Congressman Brown.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nichols. Also want to thank the University of Maryland for inviting me, including me. I couldn't get into the University of Maryland College Park, so I went to Harvard, and I've been trying to recover from that deficit ever since. But I really want to start by acknowledging the great work of my colleagues, Alonzo Washington in the 22nd District, Juanita Fisher in 47. We have overlapping districts. My congressional district incorporates, I know, all of the 47, most if not all of the 22nd. And one of the greatest joys I get out of the work that we do together is being able to work on behalf of our shared constituents. I'm often asked, you know, what's your #1 priority as a member of Congress? And, you know, people wait to listen. Is he going to say healthcare? Is he going to say education? And for me, it's constituent services. And how do you address the needs of constituents wherever and whatever their needs are? And being able to do that with Alonzo and with Juanita and with Jazz Lewis has been just a complete joy. So I, you know, prior to my service in Congress, and I'm in my 2nd term, there are 2-year terms representing the 4th Congressional District, which includes parts of Prince George's County, parts of Anne Arundel County. I spent 16 years in state government, 8 as Maryland's Lieutenant Governor in the O'Malley Brown administration, where I focused a lot on healthcare, on economic development issues, higher education, domestic violence, foster care issues. And before that, 8 years in the Maryland General Assembly. And I must say, you know, looking at Alonzo and Juanita's accomplishments, the leadership roles that they hold today, that are certainly, you know, rising stars and would have eclipsed everybody who entered the General Assembly at the year that I did in 1999. They're doing extraordinary work. You know, for me, you know, identity politics, right? It's creating those alliances that advance or promote an agenda that supports a particular group, right? By either race, religion, ethnicity, what have you. And I think each of us as elected officials, Alonzo, I think, and Juanita both expressed it well, you know, we represent the general constituency that elects us to the General Assembly and the Congress, right? We represent Democrats and independents and Republicans. We represent Jews and Gentiles. We represent Black, white, brown, men and women, trans, etc. And that's our responsibility. While it's a challenge, what makes it all doable is that regardless of your background, your experience, we all have common interests, right? We want to raise our families in a safe neighborhood, access to affordable quality healthcare, send them to good schools to be able to save for retirement, perhaps, to send our kids to college if that's what they choose, or some post-secondary education, and pursue the American dream. But what I often say is, as an African-American elected official, I have a unique responsibility. So as I'm forming those alliances, whether they're broad-based or narrow, I have a responsibility that perhaps, my white colleague in Congress doesn't share with me. I'm a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. We call ourselves the conscience of the Congress. And unlike many of the other caucuses, we have a unique responsibility. And that is to champion and fight for and protect the dreams, the aspirations, the frustrations, the opportunities for the African-American community. And I often say that, think of like the farmer, who is elected to the state legislature. They're expected to fight for the interests of all their constituents. But there is an expectation that they're really going to champion the issues of the farming community because they're a farmer. Think of the veteran who, is elected to the county council and represents a broad-based constituency, but there's an expectation that you are going to champion the issues of veterans, whether it's suicide prevention, whether it's making sure that, veterans' benefits flow to them, the ones that they've earned. And so is the same for African-American elected officials. We represent our broad constituency, but we have to champion the issues that are unique or certainly acute in the Black community, whether that's disparities and inequities in healthcare and health outcomes, whether it's the opportunity gap in education, whether it's the imbalance in the labor market. And we see that during this pandemic, how the downturn in this economic market impacts broadly the country, but certainly Black and brown communities are hit harder and will take longer to recover. That's our responsibility. And we can do it by establishing broad-based coalitions, and we can do it by staying very narrow with like-minded individuals who are going to help us promote these interests. I've always believed that a rising tide lifts all boats, but that's only if you have a boat and if your boat is seaworthy. And all too often in Black and brown communities, that's where we're lacking. So for me, identity politics is making sure that while I'm promoting the interests of my broader constituency, I assume, I accept, and I champion those unique aspirations and challenges of the Black community.
Thank you so much, Congressman Brown. So my question, my next question is, what has been the reaction to identity-based movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too from your colleagues and constituents on both sides of the aisle? And was there a shift in the wake of the murder of George Floyd? And if so, has it been sustained? So we'll start with Vice Chairman Washington.
Thank you for that question. It's been after George Floyd, the tide has shifted a lot towards people actually waking up to Black and brown issues, specifically African-American issues here in this country. I've actually talked with multiple of my colleagues about the issues that we face, and I don't think they got it before this. And unfortunately, they didn't get it before this. I even heard some of my colleagues say, for instance, some of my white colleagues on Democrat and Republican, say that they've been supportive of Black issues from day one, always been supportive. And I had to pull out multiple times to them how they did not lead on our issues or did not work on our issues. And so, it was a very difficult conversation to have, but one that needed to happen because in many instances, they were the the blockade to really moving some of our real issues, like dismantling the school to prison pipeline, like voter access, and things of that nature. So it has been a difficult, it's been a difficult time, I think, for them to finally realize that our Black people and our Black issues matter. And I'm glad that it's happening. And I see it day in and day out of how our members in the General Assembly are proactively working on Black issues or trying to take them and move them to the forefront. So I'm appreciative of this movement. Unfortunately, we had to lose a life and lose lives due to it. But I'm happy to see that we are moving in a direction where we're actually taking on real reforms for Black and brown people in the state of Maryland.
Thank you. Delegate Fisher, have you seen the same sorts of things as Vice Chairman Washington? And is it really being sustained? Because I can say in the media world where I do a lot of my work, we've seen it start to shift after some of the uprisings in cities around the country. So I'm wondering, has there still been that commitment from both sides of the aisle on issues that affect African Americans and other people of color?
That's a complicated question, Professor Nichols. I think there has been a shift. I think, Black pain is real, Black suffering is real, systemic racism is real. And I think people can hear those things, but never really realize them. And I think colleagues that should have been leading on this issue from the beginning, as Delegate Washington says, are finally now our partners. Now, our colleagues on the other side are also finding ways to quantify that. Well, a protest doesn't matter because there was looting and destruction going on afterwards. Okay, well, what have you done for like the 2,000 years of slavery though? So who cares about some looting? You know what I mean? Like, there's no context of what's really gone on, the economic toll. And I still think it's going to be a lot of work. And I just say this all the time because there's a big difference between a murder and a lynching. And what you saw with George Floyd was a lynching. And what is the difference? Is when a Black person is killed in the public square for display, that's a lynching. And I think it can be uncomfortable for our colleagues and for others to say, don't say George Floyd was murdered. To me, George Floyd was lynched. Okay, and lynching is happening all over this country and continues to be systemic. And if it wasn't for the cell phone and a lot of other things, we wouldn't really see it. And I say it in that strong way because I think that's what's needed to sustain this movement. I think people want to see change. There's work groups, there's things going on, but I think the change is going to take a lot of time. Destruction's always easy, growth is hard. And I think that as much as I'm encouraged and as much as I am prepared to fight for my community and advocate for them, I know it's going to be a really tough road. I think about the shoulders that I stand on. When you think about the civil rights movement and what changed in white living rooms around this country was seeing dogs and hoses on little Black children in the street, right? It's like people have to see the pain right in their face for them to realize what we've been saying for years, for decades, for centuries. And how it's all interrelated, and I use very strong language, Professor Nichols, the raping of my mother continent, right? The raping of resources in Africa relates to why Black Americans are suffering here. And what is that lineage? What is that thread that keeps it together? What is white privilege and why do you have it? Something that I was talking about with a couple of amazing UMD students from all different races was I said, it's uncomfortable and it's not maybe directly your direct action fault, but if you have white privilege, reflect on what that is, reflect on why you do, and take the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that murderer's knee was on George Floyd's neck every day and research and find something out other than yourself. Take 8 minutes and 46 seconds a day to expand your mind, because it's not just myself and Congressman Brown and a lot of other of our colleagues fighting the good fight. We all have different paths, but it's also our allies that might not be us to take that time to be a real partner and to check your privilege and realize we're not coming for something that you have. We're all trying to be a part of the same table. And it's really hard when it comes to talking about race, because race has to deal with what? Economics. You have to educate yourself. Why do we have this system called race that is a social construct? Is because society had to create economic barriers. And so I think when you actually really look into, you know, why are certain things happening? Why are things not? I think it really shows you that, you know, it's not going to take 2 years to change 2,000 years, right? It's going to take a systematic effort every day. It's going to take our allies to be uncomfortable. Get uncomfortable. I think if you don't identify as Black or a person of color, be prepared to be uncomfortable. And at least Wanika Fisher will help you be uncomfortable. Because the reason why I want you to is because I don't want my children talking about this. And I don't want your children talking about this. I want them moving on. I want them figuring out, you know, how we're going to have people live on the moon and other crazy stuff. But I'm still talking about the same things my uncle was fighting for and my grandparents were fighting for. And I just don't want our children to be bogged down for their creativity, their potential by systematic old problems. And it's gonna take being uncomfortable, and it's not gonna take a flash in the pan. It's gonna take a constant movement of legislation and money. Money, everybody. It's gonna take money to change it. People don't want to hear that. And when you start talking about the real money to do the things that Delegate Washington's talking about on the prison to college pipeline, real mentorship, you know, I don't like the words, I don't use the labels progressive and things like that, because same people that call themselves progressive vote for mandatory minimums. So I will say, for my politics, I have a bill in Annapolis for reparations, right? I think descendants of Maryland slaves deserve reparations. It's going to take real money to ask for the change and the equality you want. And if you're not prepared to put it up, then what are you really talking about? It's going to take resources and time. And so that's when you start feeling the pushback. The colleague that's like, oh yeah, I don't think you should be lynched in the street like George Floyd. Well, thanks for the gold star. But you know what I mean? But I need Maryland to not be incarcerating more Black men than Mississippi. We are worse than Mississippi. If you're a Black man in Maryland, you're more likely to be incarcerated than if you're Black in Mississippi. What does that say about Maryland? What does that say about us Terps? And so that's where I am in what it's going to really take to have change so that my children and all of your children can truly be in a free and equal society.
Thank you so much, Delegate Fisher. Congressman Brown, you know, kind of going a little bit off of what Delegate Fisher and Delegate Washington were saying, we've seen a lot of rhetoric that's been strong and in some cases even inflammatory from both sides of the aisle on the national level. And I was wondering, is bipartisanship dead, particularly on identity issues? Can we still come to bipartisan consensus at the national level with your colleagues in Congress and in the Senate?
Sure. You know, let me start by saying that I think this reckoning on race that we are experiencing now in this country, and I like the way that Wanika framed it up after viewing this public lynching, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think it has been profound and widespread, and I am pleasantly surprised to see ranging from Republicans in Congress to corporate America, to professional sports, and communities around the country, this heightened awareness, a conversation around race. In my conversations with white people, a willingness to explore white privilege. You know, often you're in the past very much confronted by, well, you know, I'm not racist. I don't have racial biases, nor do I have a history of bad conduct that promotes racism. Well, that's part of it, and that's good. But do you recognize white privilege, and what are you doing not to disadvantage yourself, but to ensure that all Americans have the privileges and the opportunities to work, raise a family, et cetera. And I think the conversation after the tragic lynching of George Floyd went a long way to sort of elevate that issue. Having said that, I am fearful that it won't be a prolonged reckoning, that it won't have the permanency and sustained urgency to get done the things we need to do, which is to dismantle systemic racism. So on the one hand, I've seen some progress and some good things. I'll use examples from Capitol Hill, and you asked about bipartisanship. I'm a member of the House Armed Services Committee. We recently passed the Defense Authorization Act. There's often a lot of contentious issues in that bill. I introduced about 10 or 12 provisions promoting diversity and inclusion in the armed forces. You didn't hear about them in the newspaper. You didn't read about them. They didn't make the nightly news. Why? Because they weren't contentious, and there was bipartisan support to establish mentoring programs so we can diversify senior leadership and different career fields in the military. Take a real look at, and more than a look, but to change treatment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, where today, if you're a young African-American sergeant in the Air Force, you're twice as likely to be sent to court-martial for the same conduct as a white person, right? And people think about the armed forces, they don't think about those disparities and inequities. They exist there. We see a rise in white nationalism and white supremacy in our armed forces. It's still a revered institution in this country, and it ought to be. But if left unchecked and unaddressed, it will become victim to many of the other entities and agencies and organizations in this country. So together in a bipartisan way, though, and I attribute a lot of that to what we all saw in the death of George Floyd, Democrats, Republicans came together and we got it passed. However, I'm not sure if it's enough to get to achieve the bipartisanship we need to get some even more difficult things like the Justice and Policing Act. That's real reform of police departments, right? We have to reform police departments, the way that they police. Right now, many police departments have that warrior mentality. Any means necessary to eliminate crime, regardless of the danger and threat to the community. We need to transform police departments so they're more have that guardian approach and culture. And there are a lot of things that we propose in the Justice and Policing, right? Eliminating qualified immunity, getting back to pattern and practice investigations at the federal, state, and local levels. A national standard that would ban chokeholds and other potentially fatal restraints. Body cameras for all sworn officers in every police department and law enforcement agency around the country. It'll take money to make that happen. But we passed it out of the House. We had some Republicans join us, not a whole lot. And it's stuck in the Senate, which is a Republican-controlled chamber. And it has no support from the president, who's Republican. So yes, while I think we've seen some bipartisan cooperation in addressing some of the issues, we passed a bill to remove Confederate statutes on certain national park grounds without a great deal of pushback or opposition from Republicans. But on the big things and the long overdue need to transform our police departments, it's yet to be seen whether or not we can come together in a bipartisan way to address that challenge. I believe it's going to take a Democratic-controlled Congress and a Democrat in the White House to get the kind of meaningful change that we need. Far too often, we go after the low-hanging fruit. We do minor modifications to the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We put in a few extra dollars for grants for body cameras. We need sweeping reform of police departments around this country, and it's yet to be seen whether or not there's true bipartisan support for that.
Thank you, Congressman. Delegate Washington, I wanted to actually expand, and Congressman Brown actually brought it up. He brought up Justice and Policing, and he actually brought up Leobor. And I wanted to know, I know that many activists in the state of Maryland are very concerned about Leobor, and I wanted to kind of get your position, your explanation about Leobor and where that's headed in the state of Maryland.
You know, I never really, as a politician, they teach you not to pass questions or they give you your time to talk, but Delegate Fisher has been leading on this issue in Annapolis recently. And obviously I believe the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights needs to be completely repealed. And we need to make sure that, you know, this law does not exist. We're one of only about a handful of states that only have it. But I'm gonna pass this question over to Delegate Fisher because I know she has a lot to say about it. And you can ask me the next following up question for that, because she recently did some great work on the policing reform work group in Annapolis. And so I wanted to give her her just due and just make sure she took on this topic. So Delegate Fisher, go ahead.
Absolutely. Hold on. Right before you say that, Delegate Fisher, I do want to say that we are running shorter on time. So we want to keep it somewhat concise. But no, I know Delegate Fisher.
Let me take it from her. I'll take it back then. I'll take it back because she's gonna go long-winded.
She's good.
She can't control herself sometimes. Juanica and I have known each other for over 10 years now. So
it's been 14 years.
We need to hear from the person who's a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And I think that she would be very qualified.
I'm going to try to be short. You should have like that little sign for 10. I talk a lot. It's bad. I'll be really short. I'm very happy with what's going on in Annapolis on the House and the Senate side. I think we're all putting work into the product, I believe, and the work group just voted to recommend the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which basically sets up, a lot of it is administrative, but it can be very difficult to bring about complaints, the due process structure for officers when it comes to use of force, especially when it results in death or serious bodily injury. A lot of you have probably heard about a lot of different cases throughout Maryland. So I'm very excited about that. So I think Annapolis is making those strong recommendations and ways for the session. I'm excited about it. I think we have to be vigilant. You know, something I was bringing up in the work group, and some of the language that was recommended does say this, but we also don't want to leave a hole where localities can codify the LEOBR on the local level, right? So it's like we have to pay very close attention to the bills and what we're doing. So I'm thankful to Speaker Jones's leadership on this work group and what we've come up with and what that's going to lead in bills. I think you're going to see members, you know, people don't know this about Delegate Washington. He has been putting a use of force bill in, I think, for 5 years before I was even elected, right? So there are members that have been trying to address police reform issues for a long time. And I think their bills and their ideas are finally coming to light. You know, I'm sure some of you have heard about MPIA reform, Anton's Law by Delegate Acevedo in Montgomery County, Anton Black, who was killed on the Eastern Shore. Basically no investigation, no prosecution, nothing. And it took our governor, who's a Republican, you know, he has his good moments, Governor Hogan. It took Governor Hogan getting involved to get that family answers and traction on what happened to their son. So I'm very excited. I think Annapolis is going to go in the right direction. I just think, you know, myself, Delegate Washington, the great advocacy Congressman Brown does, he'll give you a letter on a bill. I've gotten some. So those do something, and that's exciting. You know, having even our federal partners who are paying attention, who like, that's a good idea. You guys should consider that, is going to be vital to get a product out, especially when we're going to be in a very unique session with COVID, a lot of digital, a lot of hearings just like this. And so I think it's going to be good. I hope that was short. If you have a follow-up, I'll answer. I'm going to stop talking. It was short, Chair Washington.
Yeah, no.
Can I just jump in here, okay. Dr. Nichols? You know, I just want to expand on a point I made about sort of like the guardian sort of model, culture, protector of a community and society that law enforcement ought to be versus this warrior, pursue a crime at all costs. Take, for example, the case of Rashard Brooks in Atlanta this summer, right? And as we recall, you know, he fell asleep in his car in a Wendy's drive-thru. Okay, so they call the police. Right thing to do, police show up. And the police should show up because they want to protect that business, right? Guy's falling asleep, it interferes, it interrupts with business, whatever, fine. But what ends up happening is Rashard Brooks is murdered by the police. And if you look at the chain of events between when they knocked on his window to wake him up and when they shot and killed him, it didn't have to be that way. Yes, he disarmed a law enforcement officer with from his taser, but he was running away. And you've got to stop and ask yourself, what threat did Mr. Brooks pose to that law enforcement officer or even to the community? He was sleeping in a car for whatever reason. They knew who he was. They had his car. And if you're in a guardian mentality, you say, okay, great, we've protected the community. Certainly, we've got someone who did something wrong and they fled, but we've got enough information on him to follow up with him in the days to come. He's not a risk to anybody. But because of the mentality, which is warrior-like, and by God, no one's ever going to disarm a police officer. By God, I'm not going to let you run off when I tell you to stop. By God, I think you committed a crime and I'm going to hold you accountable right here and right now. A call for service to remove someone who's sleeping ended up in killing someone. That's just wrong, and there's no explanation around it. And all the legislating that we can do in Annapolis or in Congress, it is going to help. But that alone is not enough. It's a change in leadership. And often that change in leadership in police departments means a change in political leadership. You know, I think about Sheriff Clark, who presided over the sheriff back in the 1960s, Bloody Sunday, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and was hell-bent on ensuring that no peaceful protester, no civil rights activist, and certainly not John Lewis was going to walk from one end of the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the next. And he brutalized, he terrorized John Lewis and all of those peaceful protesters. The next election, after the Voting Rights Act was passed, Sheriff Lewis was voted out of office. When black and brown people, when terrorized communities exercise their right to vote and they change that political leadership, which in turn changes the leadership in law enforcement, diversifies the force, you tend to, and I believe you will continue to see better outcomes, better relationships between law enforcement and the community.
Okay, thank you so much, Congressman. I'm actually going to try and combine two questions here in the interest of time, because I want to get to audience questions. I just want to ask, you know, the GOP has decried identity politics, but also runs on them. And I wanted to ask what you thought of the effort to promote conservative Black politicians locally and nationwide. So I'm thinking of people like John James, Kim Klacik, who I know pretty well, and Daniel Cameron and others. And I also want to ask about voter suppression and what's being done on the local level and on the national level to thwart voter suppression. As we've seen over the last 10 years, we've seen almost 1,700 polling places close. We're seeing right now long lines where people are waiting in line for 3 and 4 and 5 hours. We know about what's going on in Texas and places like Harris County, where you have millions upon millions of people in one drop box for ballots. We know that Black people don't necessarily get the same level of mail service as other communities. So I wanted to ask what's being done in the lead up to this election and also to secure other elections, particularly for people of color, and what you think is about, just generally about the GOP effort in recruiting Black voters by having Black candidates.
I'll take.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, you haven't pointed to anyone, so I was just going to take the question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll take the second question, right? I mean, we just had our well, just to say something to the first question, we just had our first Black female Republican state legislator appointed from Frederick in the state's history. So that's one thing. The other piece is about elections is, you know, I served as the chair of the election law subcommittee here in the House of Delegates and have served there for about 2 or 3 years. And we passed some very, some voting access, increasing access in voting, excuse me, bills under my tenure. And just to name a couple of them, we made sure that we passed the ex-felons voting rights bill in 2015. That was to restore voting rights to about over 50,000 eligible voters. And that was vetoed by this governor, but the General Assembly overturned that in 2016. The other big thing that people don't know about, and this is one of the first years we actually have this, which is the same day voter registration. We passed that bill a couple years ago, and it went to referendum to the voters. And so we actually on early voting, you can go in and register to vote. And unfortunately, before this bill passed and before it became law, you could not register to vote on the election day. So we had to change that. We had to change the Maryland Constitution in order for that to happen. So you can register to vote and vote on the exact same day right now in the state of Maryland. The last piece we did was expanding early voting centers. As many of you know, in Virginia has been voting for almost a month now. In Maryland, we only have about a week and a half for voters to vote. So we expanded so that we can have more early voting centers and give the localities the option to have more early voting centers here in the state of Maryland. So Maryland is leading the way when it comes to voter access. Unfortunately, that's not the case for other states in the nation. But here in Maryland, we are going to do everything we can to make sure we increase access to the ballot, because we know that historically marginalized communities like Black communities, if you instill voter ID laws and all these other things, that measures that have the Republican Party has tried to push in Maryland for years now, we know that that's going to hurt our communities particularly. So we've killed those bills multiple times under my tenure, and we're going to continue to do that moving forward.
And Professor Nichols, I want to just say one thing, because I think Alonzo Washington said it all. For those of you who think our governor is just okay and he's not a version of Donald Trump, well, you need to wake up and look up who Larry Hogan really is, because you all received a mailing on how to vote instead of getting your ballot. He spent your taxpayer money mailing you the instructions to request a ballot, which today's your last day to request, by the way, rather than the ballot itself. So don't let people be here like, oh, I'm not Trump and I'm something else, because Larry Hogan is his cousin and has been making more money with his company being governor than he ever had before. And things like that, not sending the ballot, it worked in Baltimore City. They had a successful election cycle. Everyone mailed it out. More people, why wouldn't you do the same thing? And so I just encourage the Terps on the call and folks on the call, look in your own backyard, because the wolf is here in sheep's clothing. It's not always at Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, let me jump in on the first part, or I don't know if it was first or second part, but sort of, African Americans who are conservative, courted by the Republican Party. Look, from the, I disagree with, but I have respect for Republican conservatism. But that's not what we have going on either in the White House or in the Republican-led Senate. It's not. Conservatism has traditionally been sort of, okay, limited government. So we disagree. I think government can and should be a backstop when there are injustices and inequality. Whereas conservatives will say, no, individuals, you're sort of on your own. Conservatives might lead more for free trade. They pretend that they're more pro-defense than we are, although the truth of the matter is, I think when it comes to national security, I think Democrats and progressives are even better than conservatives. But there are some differences in our perspective on government I can respect while I vehemently differ. What I have a problem with is the Republican Party that we see today under Donald Trump, who many Republicans would even admit quietly in the elevator in Congress, not on the floor of the House, that he hijacked their party. And he's mean, he's vicious. There was a time where Republicans in 2016 were talking about comprehensive immigration reform, addressing the DACA issue, looking at how we can strengthen our workforce, reunite families in a way that makes sense. We may have disagreed, but there was a willingness to do it. Donald Trump got elected, xenophobic, and he said, no way, Muslim ban. He doesn't even represent conservative values. You can't represent conservative values and be in the category of sort of giving porn stars hush money. So he's not even a true conservative. But for Black conservatives, the biggest challenge that I have with Black conservatives is when is when they don't recognize that much of the progress that the Black community has made in this country is when the market fails us and government is the backstop. Sure, we might all want to get to a day where, truly there's a level playing field, race is not a barrier. But until that day, we do need to pass laws to eliminate those barriers. We do need to incentivize or prevent behavior that maintains inequity and disparities and that prevents equality of outcomes in healthcare and education and the labor market. So that's where I get frustrated with my conservative, I was gonna say friends, I don't have that many conservative friends, but African Americans who choose to be Republicans and conservatives, is when they don't recognize that limited government, that emphasis on individualism has far too often worked against the Black community. Yeah, you can say, hey, it's 400 years since we've come to this country. It's been, since 1864 or the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. You can point to the Voting Rights Act, 1964, and they'll ask, well, why are we still, asking for something? Because the legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow, of mass incarceration, of racism persists in this country, and no free market at this point is ready to correct it.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And I would actually suggest, if anybody has the opportunity to read the book, The Color of Money by Mehrsa Badaran, I think her name is, and she actually addresses a lot of the issues that the Congressman and Delegate Fisher and Delegate Washington were talking about. We thank you so much for attending. If there are any audience questions, we'd love to get them in the chat so we can get at least 60 seconds from each person on those questions. If not, I'd like to get a final statement, 60 seconds from each panelist. And also to thank you so much, and to thank the University of Maryland and for all involved who created this event. I learned so much. I hope that the viewers also learned a lot. So it doesn't look like we've gotten any questions just yet. So in the meantime, I'd like to get a, kind of a closing statement from each person. We'll start with Delegate Fisher, and then we'll go to Delegate Washington, and then Delegate Brown. Congressman Brown, I apologize.
I don't know why I always get called first in class. I want to say thank you so much, Professor Nichols and the Alumni Association, for this amazing opportunity. I want to thank Congressman Brown and Delegate Washington. It is not just a pleasure to be on this panel with them, but to work with them every day. And I'm very thankful to have allies like them. I want to just say thank you. I'm proud to be a Terp. Terps produce excellence, as you can see on this panel, and Terps are going to change the world. And I just hope that everyone on this call listening feels that they're a part of that change. Even if you didn't agree with everything we've said, you have your own opinions, I encourage you to be a part of it. Do it. Terps are changing the state of Maryland and the nation, and I'm just thankful and excited. And then the last thing I will ask, and I hope I'm at 60 seconds, is 1, please text 3 friends today about the Alumni Association, about this panel and what you learned. If you don't talk about what's going on in our community, things don't change. So I challenge you, all of you on this call, to text 3 people about what you heard today. And then the other thing is, please know your elected officials. Go to mdelect.net, put your address in. We all have a Twitter, we all have Instagram, we all have Facebook. I mean, if people out there can follow, what Kim Kardashian's doing and whoever, you can follow your local official and your congressperson. So I encourage you to do that. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Professor Nichols. Really appreciate it. It's always an honor to be on a panel with Delegate Fisher, who I feel like I see almost every day. And always great to see Congressman Brown as well. We just have so much work to do here, and I encourage you all to stay involved and get involved. There's no excuse not to vote, but also not to be involved and know who your elected official is, like Delegate Fisher mentioned. My connection from the University of Maryland, the weighs on me heavy. I think University of Maryland has actually saved my life growing up in growing up by a single mom of 6 kids and living in homelessness and living in poverty most of my life. The University of Maryland was that staple in my life that actually helped me progress through life. So I'm really honored to be a part of this and be here. And even though my daily task, I actually work with Professor Marsh, Dr. Marsh, every day I serve as the co-chair of the Police Reform Work Group for Prince George's County. And I have multiple interns from the University of Maryland who are students that actually work with me on a daily basis to help reform policing in our county as well. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to seeing everyone once we can get back on campus.
Let me also thank the University of Maryland Black Alumni Association and the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences for hosting this and for inviting me to participate. I'm a proud parent. My son graduated from College Park 2017 from the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences, Criminology and Criminal Justice, and is now a 3rd year at the University of Maryland Law School. You know, and I want to commend particularly the students who are watching in on this discussion. And, you know, I too, you know, urge you not only to vote. I suspect everyone who's watching many of you probably already voted absentee. And if you haven't, I'd go out there and vote early. And certainly November 3rd is your backstop. Make sure you get it done. But to stay engaged, peaceful protests are important, and be out there in the streets and in the community. Seek out internships on Capitol Hill or in the General Assembly, whether with the legislature or nonprofit organizations or any organization that engages the legislative, the political process. Volunteer on a campaign. Familiarize yourself with government. And while we all work together, federal, state, and local, there are meaningful differences in what happens at the federal level versus what happens at the county level and in between. So as a responsible citizen, absolutely go out and vote and continue to improve your understanding of government and the political process. So it's been a pleasure to join you this afternoon, and I wish everyone Godspeed. And I always finish my public remarks, particularly during this pandemic, by saying, in the absence of a vaccine, physical distancing, face coverings, and proper hand hygiene are our best medicine. So stay safe.
Thank you so much, Congressman Brown, Delegate Alonzo Washington, and of course, Juanica Fisher, Delegate Juanica Fisher, you already know. Thank you so much to everyone. I certainly want to give a big thank you to the School of Behavioral and Social Sciences, also to the Alumni Association, to Adrian Lim, to Amy Eichhorst, to Jen Kilberg, for all of the work that they put in to put this together. And I want to thank all of you who came and viewed. There is a recording of the event, and so if you would like to go back and revisit it. Also, I'd like to echo what everyone has said, and that is cast your ballot, cast your ballot, cast your ballot, vote, let yourself be heard, be an educated voter, know about your local officials as well as your national officials. Vote all the way up and down the ballot, judges, DAs, everybody. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again. Goodbye.